Hi. In this video tutorial, we're going to take a look at the Mcloth modifier, which is the cloth modifier that allows us to create things like uh, any kinds of cloth garments, beds, cushions, etc., that also work hand in hand with our rigid body simulations. They're both done by the MassFX inside 3D Studio Max. So just to get going and show you a few things that this modifier can do, I'm going to go ahead and create a plane. And then on my Modify tab, I'll jump over here and I'll just go with 200 over 200 and then maybe 20 segments in both length and width. I like to zero everything out when I right-clicking down here on these spinners, just to make sure everything's right in the center of the screen, and that way any of my animations aren't just a little bit off, and we can line everything up a little bit nicer. Along with my cloth here that we're going to take a look at, I'm going to need an object to drop on it so that we actually get some reactions, like cloth-like reactions here. So I'm going to make myself a sphere as well. I'll draw this out in the top viewport and go to the Modify tab, and we'll go with let's go with about size 15. We'll make this smaller so it doesn't have a chance to really jump off the page here at all. And then I'll zero these out in X and Y. But in Z we might go all the way up to 80, just so that we've got a little bit of a distance to drop this onto our cloth here from. We can go ahead and set up the rigid body here, which is just our sphere. It's fairly easy, and the rigid body dynamics are in kind of another tutorial anyway. We do that by coming up to our menu up here. I might have a menu or two that you don't have. And if you don't see this guy, the one with the sphere and the t-shirt and kind of a little stick figure guy and the playback buttons on gears, more than likely you'll need to right click out here in the empty space and make sure your MassFX Toolbar is checkmarked. Without it, your standard package kind of looks like this, and then you'll turn it on and it'll either show up here or floating over here, and you can drag and drop it to here. So with this bar up here, the first button we've got here is our MassFX Tools. Very useful, and I want to kind of stress always use them from here rather than on the modifier. Otherwise, anytime you're doing any simulations with a lot of items in it, you can't modify more than one at a time if you're using the settings in the modifier. But if you modify them via the MassFX tools here, you can modify large amounts of objects. In this case, it doesn't matter terribly, but it's just a good habit to get into, is to use, let's say, our third tab for our MassFX settings per items. To assign a rigid body object, we want to make this sphere a certain type of rigid body. If we click and hold on our little sphere button up here, this is our set selected as, hello, there we go, set selected as button, and we've got three types of rigid bodies that we can make this. Dynamic, if you're going to let gravity or forces do the work of the animation for you, pure simulation. Kinematic, if you want to be the animator and either give things a push or animate things entirely. Or static, if there's going to be no movement and you just need a wall or a ground or something there to knock things back and not be knocked over. For our sphere, we just want to drop it onto the cloth so we can get some cloth reactions here, some various things that we're going to do. So dynamic is the one that we are going to use today because it requires no extra animation or anything like that. You'll notice that the third tab here pretty much matches the settings that you get once it applies the MassFX rigid body modifier to our sphere. So once again, I like to use the ones over here because just in case at some point I may want to drop 50 or 60 spheres onto a cushiony surface or something, and doing one at a time over here is going to drive you crazy, whereas you can select all of them, change the settings here, and it'll update everything. So there's the difference. First thing I want to do is, kind of pick a physical material. We can try something light. We can do a preset, or we can just kind of set our own here. If we can, I don't know, mass of 500. We'll leave everything else kind of fairly standard. We can come back and adjust the mass depending on how badly or well it interacts with our cloth. Underneath here, the physical mesh, we've got a sphere, so convex is a little ridiculous. We'll go with a sphere mesh type. The radius should match the size of your sphere initially. And other than that, we don't have much else to do with our sphere here, so that's the easy part. Then we'll go to our plane here. This is going to be our cloth, or how something that is going to turn into cloth here. It's a fairly rigid shape right now, but we'll change that here. The T-shirt button next door to the original, the set rigid body button, is our set Mcloth button. You can click and hold it. You've got two options: either set it as a cloth object or remove the cloth object. You can also just click the button there, and it will apply the Mcloth modifier to our plane here. Now, the Mcloth modifier is a little different than a rigid body object. You can't modify more than one thing at a time. Not to mention, when it comes to cloth simulation, there's going to be a lot more calculations because we've got to get a deformable shape rather than just a reactionary shape. The sphere here, all it needs is a hard shell around it to say if you bump into something, it knocks back or knocks over or knocks into. This is going to actually deform the original shape into puffs or drags or parachutes or whatever you want this to accomplish. So we do have all of our settings over here, and you'll notice that our selection doesn't work quite the same inside our MassFX tools, so we're going to use them from over here. We do have a sub-object, so go ahead and click the little black plus sign there to open it up. The sub-object for Mcloth is a little bit different than our cloth modifier, but works along the exact same lines. And we've got vertex rather than groups in our original. I'm going to set a group of vertices to hold position here. I don't want this cloth to, if I simulate now, it would just fall out forever into nowhere or onto the ground plane even. And I want to make sure that we're going to kind of turn this into a trampoline sort of thing. So I'm going to select all of the vertices by holding down Control and dragging a selection around the outside edge of this thing. Back over in our Mcloth settings, I'm going to minimize the soft selection. We don't need that this time. And we are going to have, we've got the Make Group button, just like our original 3D Studio Cloth modifier. Works very similar to that one. So here we go. We're going to give it a group. I'm going to call this the Preserve Group. Something that lets me know these are the ones that I'm holding in place. Say OK. Once I've made it a group, it'll show up in this list down here. But it'll say unassigned, and that's what we need to tell this group what it's going to do. If I wanted these vertices to follow another object for an animation, I would use Node. Tonight we're going to use Preserve because it's just going to hold them in place right where they are. No extra animation, no anything like that, but then we don't have to link those vertices to other objects or anything else a little overly complex. If you do want to do that, Node is your go-to there. Okay, and that's all we need to do this for now. We'll come back and do some more things in these vertices with groups and stuff like that in a moment. But for now, go ahead and click that vertex selection to turn that sub-object selection off. And let's take a look at our settings here. We've got cloth behavior, same thing, dynamic or kinematic. You can do a little animation previously, part animation, part simulation, or all animation if you need. Use kinematic. We're going to use just reactionary this time, so dynamic it is. Once the sphere hits the cloth, we'll see what happens. We've got the bake button and the unbake button so that you can check it out and uncheck it out if something doesn't work right. The live drag button is a little different. We'll show you how that works in a little bit. And the forces. Right now we're using global gravity, which can be found inside our MassFX tools here on the first tab. Direction of gravity is along the z-axis, up and down, and a negative value says gravity is going to pull something down. Positive value, and you can send something up into space. Kind of thing going on here. We've also got this plane sitting right on our 000 down here. And we've got this box checked, the use ground collisions at ground height 00. I want to turn that off, otherwise it's going to look like this piece of cloth is already just kind of lying on the ground and nothing's going to happen if I leave that on. So we're going to turn it off so that the cloth has the ability to kind of sag below the ground line like it wasn't there. For right now, let's go down a little further. We've got some capture initial states and reset state buttons in case we want to start something a little bit more relaxed from a relaxed position rather than this nice rigid one. What we can do for that is we can actually do our start simulation without animation here. And we can let the cloth sag and relax a little bit if we like. And then we can use the capture initial state button to hold that position and restart it. Other than that, we can turn that off. I like to hit the unbake button, and then you might have to move your timeline slider, just wiggle it a little bit so that everything kind of jumps back into place. We're not going to capture initial state quite yet, but you can do that for other things. Down underneath here, you've got all of your fabric properties. This one's a little simpler than our regular cloth modifier. We've only got a few settings versus that huge dialog box that opens up with more numbers than any of us like to look at. But you know, lacking in a little bit of versatility maybe, but you know, or control. Our cloth modifier will still have a little bit more options in there for us to control once we get a little bit more used to using these things. However, this one's nice and keeps things fairly simple and does a fairly decent job. What I am going to look at here, our gravity is a 1-to-1 scale, which means that it's not going to double the gravity on the cloth where it isn't, say, our rigid body object. If you want gravity to pull on the cloth less or more, you can adjust this scale. So if I put it down to 0, it would kind of make the cloth anti-gravity but the sphere have gravity kind of thing. If I bumped this up to 2, our gravity might pull on our cloth down a little bit more than our sphere. We've also got the density, and this is going to be used in combination with our rigid body object. We've got a density here as well. If I set my density, we can round that down to about 2.5. It gives us a mass because they're linked for right now. We could turn that off. But this density, if it is too high for this one, we're going to end up seeing that our sphere, as I think we just did, will fall, catch, and then kind of let go. It's going to treat this surface more like it's a liquid or a semi-solid rather than an actual solid object. So we don't want to do that. I like, usually, if I take a look at the density here, we've got 2.5. If I raise it times 10, it's usually fairly decent. So 2.5, if I raise this, well, not 10, that's about, yeah, let's go with 250. I think that's times 100, not 10, but, you know, I'm not a math kind of person. And we can try this again just to see what's going to happen. Still a little too low, so we can try, we'll try doubling it. 500 here, and see what we can get out of it. Still too low. And so we've got another, if we start having to go too high, we know that we've got some other work to do here as well. Some of these should be kind of in between. Let's leave that alone for right now. Stretchiness and bendiness kind of say that what they are for themselves. And then we've got some damping and friction, so if you want things to remain a little bit stiffer, stickier, etc., as well as you can limit some of the compression of the cloth or the stretchiness and how well it maintains its shape. Volume properties we'll get to soon. Let's come down here to our interaction properties for right now. Right now it's defaulted. Something our regular cloth modifier doesn't do is default on self-collisions. And then it'll set the thickness, and it usually sets it to, you know, as thick as your original item is. It'll also duplicate that value for the thickness of what you want to collide with objects. Now, if you raise this number, you'll get that kind of force field thing happening here, whereas the sphere is going to make the cloth bend before it actually touches the surface. So usually we want these two together at the same value, but heck, you might find a reason that you want a force field thing going on there and have that changed. The next value I want to really talk about is here's our push rigid objects value. Right now it's set at 1, and this one works in combination with our density a little bit more to repel rigid bodies. Right now it's set to 1, which is not very high. If we even bump, let's just go nuts right now and bump it all the way up to 50 and try our simulation again, and we can see that now it doesn't even get close. It doesn't even stretch the cloth near as far. So with a higher value in the push and a higher value in the density, maybe a kind of a dance in between here. Maybe we can go back to 250 density and, I don't know, 20 push, and we're going to do some experiments and see exactly the different amounts of deformation, shape changes, and other things that can keep this rigid body set up on here. So see, now our times 100 or whatever it was, 250 is working pretty well. And you'll want to try and get these to work, however best you want the cloth to react. If I've got, let's say, 100 density and only 10 push, I might notice that that's not enough, not even close, because we had the same problem right there. So again, maybe 220, and we start doing kind of an up and down dance with these couple of values until we get enough of that stretchiness, and yet it is not going to allow a rigid object to pass through it. All right. So yeah, 220 seems to be a magic number for us a little bit there. If I want it to be a little less stretchy, I can raise those values even more, and that will make our cloth react like something else. Let's turn that back off. Kind of reset everything. Other than that, we've also got some tearing options, which we'll take a look at here in a moment. But there we go. That's our Mcloth modifier in a nutshell. Right now, we've got our sphere kind of bouncing on the cloth here like a sort of a limp, loose trampoline. I'm going to go ahead and raise that density just a little higher, and I think I'm going to go with maybe about a 25. And I like to do a couple of these tests just to make sure that I'm getting something fairly springy, and that's pretty decent in catching that. Now we can take a look at some of the other options. Underneath here we've got our tearing, which we can set a new group. We'll do this one last because ripping a hole in the cloth is something you'll want to do last rather than in the middle. But we've got this visualize thing here, and all this does is allow you to see what's happening and where your cloth is being pulled the most. So if I put a checkbox in here, it's going to turn green. And then if I simulate, we get to see as it changes from this cool color to these warm colors where the tension is highest. If I want to see a little bit more of a range, I can drop this down a little bit more and then re-simulate without the animation here, and I get more of that color. Okay, the lower this goes, the more of a color range I will see as this guy's pulling. And see, now we're starting to get some blues and oranges and everything in between the greens and the reds. And it just gives us an idea about where we're getting the most tension and pull out of our cloth, so that we can make some of these other setting changes a little bit more of an estimated guess rather than just a complete and total guess. So I like to leave this on. Not to mention, it's just kind of fun to watch it change colors while your ball is bouncing on the cloth. Aside from the visualize, we've got some anti-stretch, maybe another tutorial for some of that stuff, but we've also got volume properties here. And this is some really cool stuff. Right now our cloth is behaving exactly like, I don't know, a silk cloth or being held on all sides, spandex or something like that, that is just dragging, drooping, and bouncing in reaction to our object. If we enable the balloon behavior and adjust this pressure value, we can get some different results. At a pressure of 0, let's see what happens. We have this thing happening a little bit more. It acts more like a cushion or a pillow, and as pressure gets applied on one section, air gets pushed up in another. So this is much nicer for things like mattresses, cushions, pillows, anything that's going to have some air on the inside of it that's going to want to give. So you can really make some accurate animations, characters sitting down on a couch cushion or a bedspread or something like that, using this balloon pressure. And it's a fairly simple one. The more pressure you have, the more crazy ballooning you get. Springier, the bouncier, and the more it's going to return to its original shape. Hold that shape. And this, of course, with a flatter object. We've also got the option to seriously inflate things like balloons. If you've got yourself a nice deflated life raft and it's an enclosed object rather than just a plane here, we can animate this pressure going from 0 to 2, and you'll see that raft, really kind of explode and fill with air rather than this. But we'll do that a little bit later. I just wanted to show you how this works, and our tension changes, and we get that opposing effect there. All right, let's go ahead and turn balloon pressure off. You'll see it just kind of real-time updates, sags, changes if we let it go, and returns to where we had it in the first place. Let's turn that off and kind of get back to where we were. The last thing I want to show you for this little tutorial is the tearing stuff. And in order to tear an object, we need to create another group, just like we did for the outside edges. If I go ahead and select our vertice sub-object here again, right now I've got the none selected. It's really nice in the Mcloth, so you can select that so you know you're not adding to the group or making changes to our original group or anything like that. I can paint using our selection tools, or just give it heck, just grab the ones in the center. These are the ones, the vertices that I want to allow the opportunity to tear. I can be a little bit more exact with this as well. If, say, I get, oops, not my rectangular marquee, but my paint can marquee, whoa, and get my selection tool, and I can say, okay, I want a nice, just a tear down the center to happen. This will all work as well. Hold down Control, maybe I can tell it I want a spidery web kind of a tear to allow. This is not where it will tear. This is where you wish it to be able to tear. So remember that just because you've marked a perfect tear that you'd like to see down the middle, the shape of the object colliding with the cloth is going to be our ultimate in telling the tear where it's going to actually happen. This is giving us an idea of where we're going to allow the object to tear. So if I select, let's say, all these guys somewhat there in the middle, any OCD tries to make that perfectly square in the center there instead of half the rectangle. And I'm going to, instead of make group this time, use the make tear button. I'll give this a name. We'll just call it tear 1 for this, because if you've got a lot of groups and a lot of things happening here, you'll definitely want names for them. And we'll say OK. The make tear group does exactly the same thing as the make group, only instead of leaving it unassigned, it tells it it's going to allow for tears. It also kind of tessellates your polygons for you. It'll add that diagonal shape throughout all these things as well. And then you'll be able to see, if we turn this off, exactly where your tear group is located, as well as get some more kind of ragged or more correct tearing happening, because we don't want it to tear along just the edges of our boxy shapes. We like to give it the option to tear some triangles and stuff in there as well. Down here on the tearing, once you've created a tear group, this box will show up checkmarked, and you've got weld prior to tearing wherever you like, either in the normals or the vertices, or don't weld at all and things will just kind of fall apart. We'll leave it on normals for right now, and let's just take a look at this tear past number. Right now it's set for 1.5, which means when the cloth stretches to 1.5 past its normal starting point shape, then it will tear. If I set this to 1.0, that means if it stretches below this line even slightly, it's going to rip. So closer to 1.0, we're going to get a little bit more like paper. 1.5, we'll get a little bit more like a stretchier, but not terribly resistant cloth. Higher values will allow it to stretch further before a tear happens, and too high a value and it'll never tear because it's too strong. So this is kind of like your strength in and out and around here. So let's go ahead. I'm actually going to go ahead and hit the bake all button this time. and we'll see what happens. Oh, looks like my tear or my sphere here is a little bit too light, and or my cloth is a little bit too strong. So we'll unbake. Let me go to the. We'll just go to the rigid object here, and let's try 10 for a density instead. And we'll see if we can get this thing a little bit heavier to rip right through our cloth. Let it finish there. We can actually turn off our tension visualization there. And what we end up with is a pretty decent kind of stretchier kind of paper tear as we drop something through it. Shape of a character, add a little bit extra stretch, higher mass on our object, and we can get Peter Pan cutting through the sail, all kinds of stuff to allow this to tear for us. But there's your basics. That's your basics Mcloth stuff. If you're pretty decent at using the cloth modifier, this will all make pretty simple sense to you, as most of it is kind of a direct copy over from how that one originally works as well. All right.